Morning, everyone at MANUP. We have got the lovely Rachel Lemon with us this morning, who is going to be having a conversation around mental health. Now, we had a conversation off air just before we started, and it was talking about one of the most difficult parts of men's mental health, which is suicide and people taking their own life. And you've had quite a lot of experience of people in that position, haven't you?
Yeah, so obviously I worked in a hospital my career for years and years, a good 25 years. So experienced it from being a professional, but also, yeah, during COVID, three of my friends from school committed suicide. One of them, he lost his job. It had been the job he'd had all of his life. So then he lost his job. He was supposed to stay in all day. We weren't allowed out, and he was a person who used to cycle for miles every day and do all of this stuff. So losing his job meant he had to go and live with his auntie and uncle. Like the repercussions of that were that he was lost himself, and he just couldn't get himself back on his feet. And yeah, he just left the house one day with his with a coat. That was it. And left, and his body was found sort of on the 24th of December, a couple of years ago. And he'd just gone off. We live by the coast, so it's somewhere but people could disappear if they want to. But yeah, and it's an example of, although you had friends, like, people don't want to reach out. And also COVID was really brought out the best and worst of people, because people forgot to check in on people that lived on their own.
Yeah.
And so much isolation, and like, it's all right when you're the lads and you're going out for a pint every week, but what happens when that stops? And that's what happened with COVID, wasn't it? That connection that people had stopped. So that's just one example. And there was a few other people. Another friend, James, he was in a relationship which was quite toxic. The girlfriend kept threatening to stop him seeing his son. And it just escalated one day, and he just decided he didn't want to be here without his son. So that's another example of someone who couldn't carry on. And we saw the text afterwards, because his sister had his phone, and it was quite again an example of perhaps bullying. And I think, like, my background is in my personal experience of domestic abuse is quite severe, but I think we have to acknowledge that it happens to guys as well.
Yeah.
And the percentages are higher in women, but it does affect guys. And maybe for guys, there isn't that kind of, it's not so acceptable to talk to people about it. So, like, with women, if I know several other women, or many other women, that have been in domestic abusive relationships, and we could talk to each other about that experience. Whereas for guys, especially like this guy James, who goes to the gym, is a big beefy guy, to then who does he talk to about it, and who's going to listen anyway? Or is someone just going to laugh and say, like, well, look at you, that's not happening. So I think there's so many sort of different scenarios that end up where people think that it's a permanent solution is to check out. And my best friend as well, he was gay. He was in a gay relationship that was quite toxic. It was abusive, and he suffered for years afterwards with his mental health. There's many times he didn't want to be here anymore, and it affected his confidence, etc. And struggling with access to mental health care. Because the whole domestic abuse in, like, a gay relationship isn't something that people really feel comfortable talking about. And he would always feel like he felt like he didn't fit in. And I think, that's really, obviously it's really sad. And it's just like the way that people are treated, and also, like, there's this kind of, because he did often feel desperate and he wanted to commit suicide, it's almost like people get a bit blasé about it, so they don't take it seriously. And I think that's really, really difficult as well, isn't it? Like, you can't ever be complacent about it. Like, yes, people cry for help, but that time that you've ignored them could be the last time. So I think it's really important for everyone to check in on their friends, really, make sure they're all right. And I think people do forget, like at Dan's funeral, there were so many people there that just hadn't spoke to him for over a year or more. And he was my bubble during COVID. So we were like bubble buddies because we both lived on our own. And he often would say, like, like, I've got all these friends on Facebook, etc. But when I message them, no one ever messages me back. No one's got time. And, like when at his funeral, there was all these people there crying, and like, none of them had been there for him in the last year or more. They hadn't bothered to check in on him or even answer his texts. And so, like, because he had like complex mental health issues as well, like when you ignore someone like that, it then escalates how they're feeling. So that feeling of isolation, that feeling of not being good enough, that feeling of no one cares. When you are reaching out to people, which it's a brave thing to do, to reach out to someone, for any of us, isn't it? It takes a lot of courage to reach out to someone and say, I'm struggling and I need some help. So when you do that and then no one answers, it's got to be really hard, isn't it? It's tough.
Well, it's incredibly difficult, and I was having a conversation with somebody just this week about it, and a lot of it also depends on the person you're reaching out to and how they are, and whether they can take that additional burden, responsibility, and have those conversations. And it was another lady I was chatting to who just said when she's struggling, she's got a group of people that she reaches out to, and one of the first things she asks is like, what's your capacity to deal with this? And if somebody doesn't have the capacity to kind of support in the way that she wants, she'll have a conversation with someone else. And there's no kind of judgment or anything like that. But I think it's quite common what you've just said there, where people feel alone. They seem to have loads of friends on the surface, and underneath it all, there's a desire to have a conversation or a walk in the park, or somebody that kind of just says everything okay and have a conversation. And we always say reach out and talk to people, but a lot of people don't know how to react. Like you said there, if you hear that stuff a lot, people become quite blasé about it. And I mean, I suppose it kind of culminates in a question: do you think that talking about it's enough?
Oh well, like with Dan, he was open about how he felt. Like, he was very, very open. And I guess there is a certain level of where people are like, oh, I've been there before, I've tried to help, and they give up. But I guess it just depends what kind of like you said, the capacity thing. I write about that in when I write about mindset stuff as well. I write about when we do have to ask if people are in the right space to help us, because it can, if we're in a bad place and we then offload all our trauma onto someone who's already going through something that we don't know about, that can give us that rejection type feeling. But it's not personal, it's just because they haven't got the capacity to help us. So it's important to have friends that you can be, like you said, be honest with. Say, I'm in a really bad place right now, are you able to talk to me? And then have maybe like a few backup people that because it is in friendships as well, isn't it? Sometimes one person can be the person that's always struggling, and then other times it's equally weighted and you're there for each other. And that's like how mine and Dan's relationship was. But maybe for other people it wasn't that way. So it's really hard, isn't it? We can't tell. I always think that I was trying to encourage people to check in on people. And again, if someone starts to talk to you and you can't deal with it yourself, I think you've got a responsibility as well to say, actually, look, I'd really like to help you, but I can't right now because I've got this going on. And you don't have to explain yourself, but if you're a friend and a decent human, you're just saying that to them so that they don't feel like you're pushing them away, that they don't matter. Because that's what most people that commit suicide, it's because they feel that no one cares, that they don't matter, no one's going to miss them. And I actually I had a month of it experience this year with a guy who he used to work for me in a nightclub. And when he was younger, he got in with kind of like the DJs and the MCs and everything, started doing drugs, selling drugs, etc. And he was 17, I think. And so like that messed with his head. And then so obviously we had COVID as well. He was then working and then not working. And this past year, he found that same isolation. So as a sort of 21-year-old lad, he was in this horrible place where he, like you said, had all these friends on Facebook, but in reality, when he was reaching out to people, no one was answering. So he just felt totally alone. And, you know, we went through a whole month of every day him taking overdoses, or and we went through the system of going to the hospital, police cars, where we live, helicopters searching for him. And this was a repeat and rinse cycle for a good month. And we could not access, he's estranged from his family, although I was speaking to his mum, but we could not access any care for him, psychiatric care. Even when we got him to the point where he would accept it, it just didn't follow up. So we'd be in A&E. God, one time I was there for like 36 hours.
Wow.
And they just sent us home. And then the premise was, we're sending him home because he's medically fit now. You know, he'd had the IVs and everything for the overdoses. And then the people that are supposed to come out the next day, the crisis team, they didn't turn up. So then again, when you're working with someone who's having a mental health crisis like that, and you're getting through to them and they're accepting the help, and then the help doesn't come, then it just spirals again, because they're like, well, I don't matter, like no one cares. And it was like it was, I would say it was quite traumatic for me actually, that month. And watching how he was treated, and like how some of the nurses spoke to him, again, because he's young, he's a bodybuilder as well. You know, there was a kind of, the way he was spoken to was like, you're wasting a bed, you're wasting our time.
Wow.
You know, so like one of the occasions we were there, a nurse kind of said pretty much that to him, like, you know, I've got better things to do than be dealing with someone like you. And he had taken lots of drugs. He had drunk because he had intended on leaving us, and he pulled his like line out of his arm, so there's blood everywhere, and he sort of ran out of the hospital. And I had to get the police to like come and search for him, but the hospital wouldn't even check on the cameras, like, I was to see which way he'd gone, because like I said, we live in the countryside, like he could have gone anywhere. At midnight, you know, it's like needle in a haystack. And yeah, the whole way, the hospital staff, they're not equipped to deal with mental health. You know, people with mental health problems are going into a normal busy A&E department, and they're just, there's no compassion there for people. Very rare. The person who was most compassionate to us, and like I said, we were in and out every day for a month, was the security guards and one of the cleaners. And they were the people that showed the most actual knowledge. And I think security guards now have training, don't they, on mental health and how to deal with that kind of thing. But they were kind of like really helpful and very good at helping talk him down, because like, I'm 5'4", he's 6 foot odd, and he's, like I said, he's a bodybuilder, he's 100 kilos. So me trying to hold someone, stop them, you know, he ran out of A&E, and he was like, well, this overdose isn't going to work, so I'm going to dive in front of a car. And he tried to dive in front of a car. He wasn't thinking straight, because obviously I was like, Cam, you can't do that to you know, imagine the old couple driving the car if they'd killed you, like,
yeah,
like,
yeah, absolutely.
you know what I mean, like the impact. But the fact that happened like 10 foot from the A&E door is just awful, isn't it? Because we were there, he was saying that he needed help, he was asking for help, and he got made to feel like he was a waste of time. Yeah, luckily that story has had a happy ending at the moment. You know, I don't think, you know, I think he's always going to struggle with his health like that. But yeah, now he's moved away and he's got a girlfriend and he's kind of starting a new life. But, you know, it could have turned out so differently. And,
well,
you know, that,
like I said, seconds away from it being differently as well. You know, that's, and then you can't look at, I think maybe that care and compassion when he was first sat down on the bed with the IV in his arm would have made such a difference. I mean, like, what do you think needs to change? Because it almost sounds like A&E, certainly in that position, I can't say for everywhere, wasn't the right place for him.
Again, it's really hard. So like, he'd taken drugs. So that can affect your perception of what's going on around you. It can make you more agitated.
Yeah.
And obviously then the fact, so and being a young person as well, going into so imagine going into somewhere that's really bright lights, loads of people, and you've taken an overdose, but you've taken other drugs as well, and your mind is not in a clear way at all. So then being put in the middle of a bay of loads of people with bright lights and everyone like talking about you, and you can hear them, but you don't really understand what they're saying. That's not a great place, is it? We need to have like we asked for a private room, and obviously I understand, you've got stroke patients, you've got cancer patients that need it, but you could have a room without a bed for mental health patients. That could just be a safe space, couldn't you? That's, again, even like color psychology, that's painted in a color that's like calming,
yeah,
and again, things that aren't a safe space where there isn't things that you could like harm yourself with. Because that's another thing that happened. He locked himself in the toilet, and then in the toilet he found, broke something. And so there needs to be safe spaces within hospitals, whether or not hospitals have a separate, like A&E for mental health. And I think there are enough patients to warrant that being a service. There must be, mustn't there? Like when I was in there for that whole month, the amount of other people that had come in with overdoses and mental health problems was huge. And I think there must be enough to warrant the government having some sort of investment in, even if it's small units with 5 beds, say, for mental health patients that go in emergencies. And I think then the other problem then was that the hospital were like, we've treated him medically, there's nothing we can do, so they were sending him back out. So this is why we're in and out. And, they weren't looking at the bigger picture. Like, he was determined to kill himself, and he was determined that if he couldn't do it with tablets and drink or whatever, that his next step in his head, logically, was to either jump off the bridge or jump in front of a lorry. And every time he had those thoughts, I had to ring the police to help me stop him, because he was like in that place. And again, the impact of that, like I said, if the first was an old couple, so imagine just driving your wife home from hospital and you kill someone, because that's how it's going to feel to you, isn't it? Even though
absolutely, of course it is.
Or imagine being the lorry driver and someone just drops off the bridge and so the effects are devastating to not just the person that's taking their life, but it affects so many other people. And like, it's really short-sighted that the hospitals can't see that, because if someone's not safe, if they're a danger to themselves and others, we need to have a safe place for them to be until they are in a better state of mind. And it is hard, isn't it? If you've taken an overdose or harmed yourself because you don't think anyone cares, then you're actually brave enough to say, actually, I do need help, I'm going to accept it. And then you're turned away. It's obvious
vicious cycle, isn't it?
It's obvious what the outcome's going to be, isn't it? If you haven't got someone like, if Cam didn't have someone like me that was just stayed with him 24/7, and we had another friend, his boss, and between us was literally like juggling 24/7 so that he wasn't on his own. Not everyone's got that, have they?
No.
And it was exhausted. We were exhausted, like mentally, physically exhausted ourselves, because it's like, how can you stop someone?
Your brain doesn't stop when you're kind of with someone like that, does it? Because you're constantly kind of, even if they're nipped out for a cup of tea or just go to the toilet, you're thinking like, how long should I leave it before I need to go and check on them, kind of thing.
Oh yeah, he'd like hidden stuff in the bathroom, like tablet, like the sink was broken, there's tablets hidden in there and all sorts. Like, again, if someone's really determined, it's interesting because I've got another friend who's American, and she's end of life sort of coach. So for people that know they're dying from a disease, etc. But some of that does involve people that choose to end their life for whatever reason. And her sort of take on it to me was, it wasn't my place to stop him, but if he really wanted to do it, I should be leaving him alone.
Wow.
But to me, it was like, the fact he was reaching out and messaging me or leaving notes, etc., to me was a sign that he did want help. Because like I said, where we live, you could just, like my other friend John, you could just go off, disappear, and no one's ever going to find you. If you go off the cliffs, it could take years or months. So, the fact that someone's reaching out, even in the smallest way, even if it seems like attention seeking, that still means there's hope that they want to be here, that they want to be helped.
Yeah.
And I think,
Absolutely.
I did stop and think, when she said that, because I was like, how many times do I stop? How many times do I call the police? How many times do I try and stop him if it's what he really wants? But like I said, every time he would either leave a text or a message or something, there would be something. And I'd be like, well, if he's communicating, then that's because he wants me to know that he's going to do it.
Yeah. So what was the turning point then? Like at what point did that, because you said it was a month, like what was the breakthrough moment, or the point in time where you thought, actually we can get through this? And more importantly, when did like Cam think he could get through it as well?
I think, well, he got, in the end, the police, obviously, because the police were coming out every day to find him, because the hospital were letting him go and they have to call the police every day. He did get sectioned, but the police, again, because there was no mental health beds, the police took him to like a holding cell place, which he absolutely hated.
Yeah, but it's like being in prison, isn't it?
Yeah, basically it was like a prison, yeah. And so that point was when he was still a bit self-destructive, but that's when he stopped trying to overdose daily, etc. And then gradually just sort of doing some stuff, like he'd smashed his flat up, so like getting it back in order, so just doing little daily things. And then, like I said, he decided to move away, and he met a girl and moved away, and he got a job, and now he's sort of back to being like a normal, I say teenager, he's not a teenager, he's like in his early 20s, but kind of got a life that he didn't have here, perhaps. But again, that all hinges on, doesn't it, he's kind of put all his eggs in one basket with this girl, so I hope that it works out. And at the moment he's happy and safe, but the core things underneath haven't really ever been dealt with, because he hasn't had that help to work through them.
I mean, that must be
So,
quite a worry then, because if it's there, it doesn't effectively take much for that to rise to the surface again, does it?
that's what I mean. So, like, say this girl breaks his heart, or, not intentionally, but say they split up, for example, and he could easily spiral into that downward place again, because he's kind of like, he just, again, so his background, he had an abusive dad. His dad abused his mum. He grew up seeing that. He then was kicked out, so at a very young age he was fending for himself. So again, it also, lots of things stem back to childhood trauma, don't they? So he experienced a lot of things that no sort of young person should experience. And when he tried to speak to his mum about it, her memories of it were different than his, which is normal. Like, she was a mum trying to protect her kids, he was a little kid trying to protect his mum, but also taking the brunt from his dad. So because he was the boy, so he's like, that's never ever, no one's ever worked through that with him. And at the time when we were in A&E all the time, that wasn't the time to start thinking about doing that. And I think now he's in a place where he feels like he's in a good place, he won't want to address that. But if we'd have had the support from social services and the mental health team, I think that would have been something that could have been talked about, and something that could have been, helped him, because giving someone antidepressants doesn't take away years and years of trauma. It's not gonna, unless you can work through and understand that it's not your fault. It's not going to just change, is it, just because someone's giving you a pack of citalopram or something? That will elevate your mood temporarily and make you feel a bit better, but it's not a long-term solution. So it will at some point, because when you've had traumas like that, there's always going to be triggers that trigger you off. There's always going to be things that remind you of what happened. That's what trauma's like. The healing path isn't linear.
No, of course not.
So there will be times, I think, like, for now it's just like being happy that he's happy and that he's got someone, and that he's got a job and he's doing well, and then just being there if and when it happens again, and that he does know I think it's good that he knows he has got some people and who they are.
Yeah.
But again, when you're in that situation, you can feel isolated and alone, and you don't know who to turn to. And so maybe one of the things we could all do is like have a mental health plan before we get into a crisis. You know, like it's when you're in a crisis, that's when you're reaching out to all these people, like you said, that may not have the capacity to help you. They might not have the experience, they may not have the empathy. There's a million different reasons why people can't help. So yeah, maybe you know, maybe we all need to have a, if I ever get in that state, these are my people that I know are going to be there for me.
And
Like
what
you
would
said,
that look like, do you think, like if someone had a mental health plan? Because like obviously we talk about when you're not here, you have a will, so you have like a legal document with all stuff kind of written down. Like it feels to me like you almost need a, what a phrase, like a living will, mental health crisis pack or something like that, to be able to, if somebody knows you're in that situation and you've given it to somebody, to be able to then pick it up and say, right, this is what we need to do for Jordan, this is how it works, these are the people we need to talk to. Is that like what would
yeah,
your
I
thoughts
guess,
be
and
around it?
I guess as well, like with Cam, we had to get obviously his parents were down as his legal guardians, so we had to get that changed when me and Kev were in hospital with him. We had to go through the process of getting all that changed so that they could give us the information that we needed to look after him.
Yeah.
As being next of kin. So I guess that's important for everyone as well. Like, make sure your next of kin are the person, you know, his next of kin was the person that had been abusive towards him. So can you imagine that? Yeah. So, you know, maybe that's the thing as well, is like making sure that our next of kin is up to date. Like, and our next of kin doesn't have to be family, it can be someone that you trust. And I guess people aren't aware of that either, are they? They just think, oh, it's my mum and dad. But sometimes your mum and dad are what got you there in the first place, or your partner, etc. So yeah, having that, I guess as well, like if you have, all of it is around the stigma, isn't it, of having mental health problems, because we all have moments where we don't feel good enough, or we stressed, or things get on top of us. So it's having your network where people notice if your behavior changes. And I say that as well, like with domestic abuse, because you know, as employers, like I lost my job as a result of sickness, which was a result of what was going on at home. Definitely impacted on it. But if you're an employer and you've got a member of staff that suddenly starts to come in late every day, or suddenly starts to take more sick, or you notice, like when I was a manager, you know, you notice when someone suddenly starts to not wash perhaps, or they don't shave as often, or you know, there are signs that the rest of us can see, and it's just being like letting that person know that they can talk to you and that there is a safe space. Or if it's not you, signposting them to someone. You know, if you work in a big organization, you've probably got Oki Health, etc., where you can refer people to. But just having resources. And I guess as well, like if we're talking about the work example, there was a guy who was a really good pharmacist. He then started this spiral of drinking. He was then taking drugs from the pharmacy, you know, from work. And people were noticing, but people, instead of people being treating him with kindness, there was a lot of, oh, he looks like a tramp, he stinks, he's, you know, there's kind of all the behaviours that weren't really conducive to helping him get better. And yes, he did need to be removed from the workplace, because you can't have someone stealing drugs from a hospital. But also he, as a person who works in the caring industry, he deserved care to help him get better as well.
Yeah.
And yeah, so like again, the signs were there. And I think that the signs, if you know it within your friendship, you can start to see when people getting depressed, can't you? You can see like people's eyes. You can see that kind of loss of interest in things if you're kind of emotionally intelligent enough. But most of us should be able to notice when our friends start to behave differently.
It's quite subtle at times, isn't it? Like to start with, like it's gradually subtle, but I guess like probably part of the thing that we struggle with guys is having those close enough relationships to have contact with somebody enough to be able to spot those subtle changes, isn't it? Whereas, and obviously I'm generalizing here, but like women tend to have a much bigger support group and they can kind of have those conversations. And like one of the things Dan, our CEO, talks about is we want to try and stop or kind of bring awareness to these conversations around mental health before you get to the point where it's a problem, where it's just a little bit of something in the back of your head that's kind of niggling away, and it's slight little behavior changes, because those people around you that are closest to you will see those changes, won't they? They'll see the little, like you said, maybe not sleeping properly, maybe you're not having a shave, maybe you're not washing as regularly. Those little things, when you're aware of them, can be the signals to actually, I need to intervene here.
And that's like what I was saying to you, like we've all got a responsibility. So like it's kind of noticing, like I said, the signs, and also having conversations without judging people. You know, like I can remember my nan, and like that's just how she was, but she would be more like, oh, well, you know, you haven't washed to someone that was depressed. Oh, you haven't washed for weeks. Go and sort yourself out. You know, like you said, whole thing, man up, get on with it. That kind of whole attitude doesn't help anybody. So it's around, isn't it, having people, all of us being aware that any of us can be depressed at any time. Like it doesn't take much, does it? They say we're all 3 paychecks away from being homeless, for example. You know, and the pandemic really, and the crisis now, cost of living crisis now, I think again affects all of us. But I guess as a man, if you've got a family, you were the breadwinner, then all of a sudden you can't pay their mortgage, you can't pay for food, you can't pay for your school, children's clothes, trips, etc. And like you said, you haven't got anyone to talk to, and you start to feel really bad about yourself. The impact's huge, isn't it? Because you can't see a way out. And you know, there's been many guys, haven't there, that have been in that situation, who have like thought their family is better off without them. You know, that's anecdotal, but I've seen it, you know, I've seen it a lot through my career as well, where people have thought, you know, my family's better off without me because I can't provide for them, I can't support them. And so it's kind of, again, it's around having values, isn't it? Like what values do we all have as humans? And how can we sort of help others? Like you said, having a plan before and making the conversation so there isn't a stigma. You know, like I think even the language that we use, like, and I say that again around with abuse, because it's saying like disordered, broken, damaged, etc., etc. All those languages are just feeding into the fact that you're not good enough, or that there's something wrong with you. And you know, it's not actually the case, is it? You know, if you break your leg, someone would be like writing jokey things on your plaster cast, and you know, supporting you, offering to do your shopping, or you know, giving you a lift. So you know, why aren't we treating people's minds in that way?
Yeah, I mean, it's so powerful. Absolutely. So in terms of like, we're kind of getting towards the end. I'm conscious we're kind of running out of time. If you could go back to maybe some of the scenarios and the people that were struggling and maybe who haven't got anybody around them, is there any advice you would give to those people? Because there'll be people watching this when this kind of goes up on our website that are in that position and maybe don't have those close relationships that some of us have. Like, what would your advice be, or what would you suggest to somebody like that?
I think, you know, like, do reach out to strangers, and sometimes it is easier to speak to a stranger. So like if you follow accounts on social media, like I talk about things like that, like you probably do, you've got groups, you know, don't be afraid to reach out to them, because they know, like most of them probably have been in your situation before, because that's why they're volunteering, that's why they want to help, that's why they want to make a difference. So yeah, don't be afraid to reach out to a stranger. And sometimes it is easier, isn't it, to talk to a stranger, because they're not involved in whatever's going on, so they can give you that perspective without judgment. And you know, and it's always going to be confidential. So you know, always there's lots of people I know. I always have my DMs open, but there's lots of people that always have their DMs open and that will answer. And like you said, the men's the MANUP thing, there's an initiative like the men's shed and things like that, aren't there, where people can just go, and you know, starting to build up for guys where they can just go and meet other guys and don't have to talk about what's going on, but at least they've got some people around them. And yeah, and you know, like with older people as well, you know, like again, there's a whole generation, aren't there, that are quite isolated. It is, yeah, like join groups and things like that, but that's hard when you're depressed, isn't it? Like getting yourself out of the house, going to talk to someone, that's the thing, that's the hard thing.
I think generation is very, very different as well, isn't it? Like you look at older generations, they'll kind of deal with this stuff a little bit differently, and the whole concept of mindfulness and mental health is relatively new. Like, I hadn't heard about mental health or mindfulness when I was growing up as a kid in Newcastle. It just didn't exist because you were growing up in the view of like old school northern men mentality kind of scenario, you know. And it's only now when we start to talk about this stuff that you realize how important this is for people to open up and have those conversations. And like, again, Dan, we've had conversations around this as well. Like mindfulness for men can be lots of different things, as it can be for women, of course, as well. But like pottering around in the shed for an hour and a half just to kind of clear your thoughts, that could be the bit that you need just to switch off. Tinkering with the car, going for a game of golf, all those little things help kind of reset and take you out your thinking and just bring you back to your present state. And that stuff's so important. And I've certainly learned that running a business, that those are the things that you can just forget about and they just kind of go to the back of the queue because you've got clients and stuff to do and a work list and a to-do list as long as your arm. But it's counterintuitive to just plow on when you need to take that little bit of a break.
And I think that, yeah, you touched on that's important as well, isn't it? Like, even like on LinkedIn, for example, you've got people who are like, I have to post every day. If I don't post every day, something bad's going to happen. And actually, you know, if you need to take a week off, take a week off. Nothing's going to happen, is it? Nothing's going to happen at all. And there's this kind of like, people get caught up on the followers, etc., etc. But actually, you know, having a pause when you need to isn't failing. It's like, it's actually winning because you're acknowledging that you need to rest. And sometimes that reset can be all the change, you know. Like, if we're doing the same thing every day over and over again and it's not getting us where we need to go, then actually sometimes having a complete stop and break and will bring us back invigorated. So I think, yeah, it's really important, like you said, having micro habits. So like, you know, whether and we all say that, don't we? Like, whether it's like going to the gym, like no one really wants to go to the gym until you get there, and then you're fine and you've enjoyed it and you come home and you feel better. So it's that kind of like building in the little habits, like you said, that work for you. And they don't, I was saying the same with meditation and stuff. Like, meditation for me could be like going for a walk on the beach with my music on. It doesn't have to be sitting cross-legged doing yoga. It's kind of like, it's what works for people, isn't it? So it's finding your like happy activity. And like you said, it's almost, I think, scheduling it into your day. Like you said, if you're self-employed, for example, it's actually blocking it out into your day, isn't it? It's saying, right, this hour is going to be, and for all of us, again, having boundaries, you know, like what time, and you know, it's hard, isn't it? We all need to earn more money, everything's going up, but actually having boundaries and saying, like, what time do I stop answering work messages? What time do I make sure that I have off, you know, whether it's one day a week, half day, but make sure I have some time. And even if you're in a family, you know, everyone still deserves to have some time for themselves.
Yeah.
And you know, like, again, we've got so many people, and we like guys that working 2 jobs or working extra hours to try and pay for the increasing bills. So like you said, looking after yourself goes out the window because you're so busy looking after everyone else and doing all the running around and stuff that you forget. But it could be like 15 minutes in the morning, couldn't it? Or 15 minutes at night where you just go and do your own thing. And maybe when we're talking about generational, you know, when we talk about the men's sheds now, actually, the older generation, like my granddad, my great uncle, they did have their sheds that were full of their little pottering stuff, but they just disappeared. Like, you know, I can't be bothered with the nagging wife. I'm just going to go in my shed. So, you know, that whole concept actually maybe is something that's really great, because for that generation, it was their meditation, it was their space.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think having, again, I mean, it's the same for busy women as well, isn't it? It's like people are juggling so much that, like you said, the first thing that goes out the window is just looking after yourself. So, you know, we're all guilty of it. I know I've done it before. I've been on a big deadline this week and I've just done like round the clock working. So, and I feel it. I feel it. If I haven't gone out every day, I haven't got the fresh air.
Absolutely.
It impacts you. Yeah. So I think it's around finding out your thing. So, you know, for a lot of guys, going to the gym is a really good thing, isn't it? They meet other guys, they can have a chat, they can have a laugh. They're doing something. The exercise obviously is scientifically proven to help boost your mood, you know, the chemicals it releases, etc. But you don't have to be a gym guy. You know, there's other things you can do. There's like libraries, there's coffee, you know, there's so many different things out there that people can do. And it's just finding the thing that you enjoy doing, that you don't feel like you're doing because you've got to. I think that's the difference, isn't it? If it becomes a chore, you're not going to do it.
Yeah, 100%, absolutely. And actually, I think there's a couple of things that you said there that I really love. The micro habit stuff, like it doesn't have to be massive New Year's resolution kind of stuff where you try and clear the decks and try and make massive changes. And by the end of February, all your resolutions have failed. It's just those little incremental changes over a period of time. And if you can't do 15 minutes, start with 5. If you can't do 5, start with 1 or 2, and just gradually build that in. And I think we sometimes lose sight of why we're doing this all in the first place. And actually, if you're out there working and grafting, you're providing for your family, that's amazing. And you take me hat off to you, because I've been there and done it, and it's bloody hard, and I'm sure you have as well. But by not looking after yourself and taking that time, it's only going to end one way, and that's your health suffering. And ultimately, if that happens, then the rest of the family and the other people that you love suffer as well. So it's about putting yourself first, and that's not selfish by doing that, is it? It's just saying, I need to look after myself, and I need to be the best version of me that I can right now, not the best version that I could possibly be, but right now, today, the best version I can be, given the circumstances that I'm in, to be able to offer this help, support, work, and everything else for the rest of the family.
Yeah, and that, again, that's vital for everyone, isn't it? It's around, none of us can look after anyone else if we're not looking after ourselves. And we'll end up burnt out, we'll end up resentful, we'll end up having a breakdown ourselves. We see it day after day in healthcare, but in lots of professions, it's burnout in healthcare, for example, is like 80% of the staff that did the staff survey are burnt out and they've got compassion fatigue. So, it's pandemic in itself, isn't it? It's something that's just there. And again, do we put this pressure on ourselves to be perfect? It's a limited belief that we've got to be perfect. So we keep striving for more and more, when actually, like, stopping to think, like, what's good enough? Like, these people that are chasing like millions and millions of pounds, like, how many millions is it going to take before you realize that actually you don't need that much money? You just need enough money to pay your bills, go on holiday, do the things that you want to do. But then you need to balance that out with spending the time with the people that you love, because if you work 24/7 and you don't ever see your kids and you miss them growing up, then what was that money all worth at the end of the day? Because that's what people remember, isn't it? Is they remember doing things and not having things. So the experiences. I guess we just all need to be. One of the things I sort of teach people is to, even if you're in a bad place, like having gratitude, like, and starting off, even if it's just one thing each day. Like, we all must have one thing a day that was a good thing, whether it's you come home and your dog wags their tail at you, or there's got to be one thing in everyone's day at least, and then working up to 3, or and if you, even if in your worst days, if you can manage to find 3 things that you're grateful for that day. And I think, again, given the situation in the world at the moment, we should all easily be able to do that. Then that can help us reframe those thoughts that we're having, that everything's bad. Because just like having the intention, to sit and think, right, okay, what was good today, and just sitting with it. And because there will be something, won't there? Like, you would have seen a bird or a butterfly. There's a million things that happen in our lives every day. That we can just stop and put, and that comes down to the stop and pause, doesn't it? Stop and pause and just think, and start training our brains as well, because, like, it's easy to get into a spiral of being negative, and we can keep feeding that, or we can try and counteract it with some activities that help us be more positive. And that's not saying that people with depression can just flip the switch and be happy, because that's not what happens. That's not how our minds work. But we can all practice, like you said, the little things. And you said about New Year's intentions and resolutions, etc. I just don't believe in that anyway.
No.
I think that you're setting yourself up to fail. If you're like, on the 31st of December, you're like, I'm going to do this massive thing this year, and you're just saying that in your head, and you haven't got any plan or a roadmap to get there, then you're never going to succeed, are you? What's changed just because the clock struck midnight? So I think, like, even like any goal that you've got, like, have little goals building the little micro habits, and then when you've hit that goal, then you can go on to the next one. And even like Dan, my best friend going, that should teach everyone that you've got to live in the moment. Like, yeah, it's fine to plan for the future, and quite often we get stuck in the past, but really the only time we ever have is now. And like, if you spend all of your time now planning what's going to happen next year, you need to be aware that we don't all get it next year. And that's the bottom line. And it's it sounds harsh, but it's true. So you've got to find that balance of, yeah, it's fine to have plans and goals, but make sure that you're living while you're alive.
Yeah, so powerful. I mean, that's a great way to kind of wrap that up. And I think there's a lot that people can take, and people who listen from this will take bits and pieces from it. Well, everyone's going to hear this differently. The stuff that has resonated with me, like I said, it's the micro habits, it's the finding the 3 gratitudes in every single day. And that last bit that you just said there, we haven't got a guaranteed next year. Rachael, thank you very much for coming on. Thanks for sharing your story, sharing the time with us. We'll get this uploaded on the website, and thanks for supporting MANUP.
That's okay, my pleasure. And I know that, like, my friend Dan would, that's what he would want me to do. So that's important, to make sure no more lives are lost than need to be.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks.